Visit www.flaskup.com for all your Mr. Pandaria raiding guide needs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the 10-man normal mode version of Horridon in the Throne of Thunder raid. In order to complete this fight we use 2 tanks, 3 healers and 5 DPS. However, if you don't think your DPS is up to par, you could consider doing it with 2 healers, but it does become a real healer intensive fight as it goes on, so you should bear that in mind. This fight mainly consists about the different troll tribes and how they are helping out Horridon in this fight, but first things first, we'll take a look at his 3 abilities that are kinda, well, hard heal, I guess is the way of wording it. So his first ability is called Triple Puncture, and this is an attack that will be dealt to your tank, the tank that is currently tanking the boss, which will deal 400,000 physical damage and also increase the damage they take from Triple Puncture by 10% for 1 minute 50 seconds. And this is also a stacking debuff on your tank. I think when we killed this boss we had this stat going up to around 8 or 9 at certain points, so your tanks need to use cooldowns and you also need to be awake when it comes to your healing. His second ability is called Double Swipe, and this is where Horridon will swing his head and his tail, which will then inflict 300,000 physical damage to anyone that is standing within a 35-yard cone radius in front and behind of him. So again, your tanks need to be aware of the positioning of Horridon. You don't want his tail to be in the middle of the raid, and because obviously the ability is called Double Swipe, he will do it twice, so if you get hit, it's going to deal 600,000 physical damage to you. Not something you want to be taking. And his third normal ability is called Charge, and this is what the raid needs to be aware of, mainly because when he does focus on a player, he will charge at them, and then he will perform a double swipe once he reaches that location. So if you're all stacked up as a raid for AoE healing, he charges in, he then double swipes, your raid is going to get one shot. Be aware of this. There's probably about 5 or 6 seconds before he actually does charge when he's focused on someone, so you just need them to move out of the raid so the charge goes elsewhere and everyone else can focus on the jobs that they're currently doing. Now around the arena there are 4 different gates like the one you can probably see on the screen at the minute, and from these gates you'll get different troll tribes associated with each gate, and different people from each tribe such as healers, damage dealers and pains in the arses will come out, and your tank that's not tanking Horridon will have to pick them up. And the gates open in a specific order. They go from the left hand side of the room to the right hand side of the room, and then once all 4 gates have been opened and then closed again, you'll then face Horridon in the middle of the room and also someone else who we'll speak about later. Now the 4 different tribes that will come out of the gate are the Jakari, I think that's how you say it, the Gurubashi, Jakari and the Amani. Now they're okay, they're not overly important. It's the Zandalari that you need to be aware of mainly, because the Zandalari Dinomancers, that's convenient, Horridon's a bit like a dinosaur, they're Dinomancers, will jump down from the top of the arena into the area that you're kind of standing when you're at the gates. And the Dinomancers are key to this fight, because their first ability is called Dino Mending, and this is where they will channel a beam of healing goodness at Horridon, and that will heal back 1% of his health every second. Now in the first phase we'll call it, where you're going from gate to gate, you don't really need to worry too much about dealing damage to Horridon, that comes later on in the fight. So, but just if you can put a dot on him every now and then or something, and then the damage from tanks, that'll be enough to see you through phase 2 and also meet enrage timers. Now when the Dinomancer gets to 50% health, he will transform into a powerful Devil Saw, and this will increase his physical damage dealt by 50%, however it does mean he can no longer cast Dino Mending, and if he does cast Dino Mending before he reaches 50% health, obviously you need to make sure this is interrupted. Any general interrupts will take care of this. Now this next bit's key, and this is what will obviously progress the fight for you. And when the Zandalari Dinomancer transforms, it will drop something called an Orb of Control. Now people are able to right click on this Orb of Control and they can then interact with it in order to temporarily control Horridon's mind, and this will force him to charge at that door, that gate, which will destroy the gate and it will stop anyone else coming out of it. So then that's when you move on to the next gate. Now, when Horridon has charged the gate, he will gain a debuff on himself called Headache, and this will stun him for 10 seconds, so this gives you a chance to move to the next gate, or even DPS the boss for 10 seconds, or maybe catch up on some healing. As well as this, he will also gain another debuff called Cracked Shell, and this will increase his damage taken by 50%, and this is a stacking debuff on him. So after you've been to all 4 gates, he's going to be taking 200% increased damage. This is why you don't really need to worry too much about your damage on him when you're killing the people at the gates, because if he's taking that increased damage in phase 2, it's going to be a lot easier to kill him. We'll talk about the 4 different tribes that come out of the gates in a moment and what they do, but first of all we're going to take a look at the main man for this fight, who isn't Horridon. He is War God Jalak, and after all 4 of the tribes have been called, or when Horridon is damaged below 30% health, War God Jalak will enter the arena and join in with the fight. And his first ability is called Bestial Cry, and this will inflict 100,000 physical damage to all players, and it will also increase damage dealt by War God Jalak by 50%, and this is a stacking buff for the boss. So obviously after he's cast 3 of them, he's going to be dealing 150% extra damage. Your healers don't want to take care of this. I know, I heal, I didn't enjoy it one bit. Now his second ability, which isn't really on him, it's more on Horridon, is called Rampage. And when War God Jalak dies, Horridon will enrage slightly and increase damage dealt by 50% and attack speed by 50%. So tanks are going to be taking quite a bit of damage, and of course this is also going to bring into consideration his triple puncture debuff that he will place onto the tanks, and the additional damage that people will be taking from that. So when you've entered phase 2 and War God Jalak's jumped down, you do need to move to him, leave Horridon's ears, keep them next to each other, but make sure that you do kill off Jalak as soon as possible because of the damage he'll deal from Bestial Cry. So now we're going to move on to finally take a look at the 4 different gates and the tribes, and also the different mobs that are related to that tribe and how they're going to try and stop you in defeating Horridon. So the first gate is the Faraki, and these have 3 different types of mobs just like the other 4 gates. And there is a specific kill order for things that we kind of put together based on how deadly we thought the mobs were. So the first set of mobs that can come out of the gate are called the Solithuiz Stone Gazers, and once these are called to action, they will constantly come from the gate until it is destroyed. Now the Stone Gazer will stare at its target and it will then stun them for 10 seconds. The second mob that will come out is called a Faraki Skirmisher, and these will keep on coming from the gate as well, a bit like the Stone Gazers, until it is destroyed. Now these don't have a special ability, they're just skirmishers, they don't deal high amounts of damage. And the third mob that comes from this gate is the Faraki Waste Walkers, and well, they don't technically come from the gate, they jump down from the arena once the Faraki are called into fight. And these have 2 abilities, the first one called Blazing Sunlight, which is a dispellable magic debuff that will be placed on people, which will initially inflict 80,000 fire damage and then 20,000 fire damage every 1 second for 30 seconds. We let this stack to about 3 or 4 before we decided to start dispelling it off people, just because we didn't want to completely drain the healer's mana. And the second ability that these guys have is called Sand Trap, and this will inflict 100,000 nature damage to nearby enemies for every second, and it will grow in size over time. So you don't want to really be standing near the sand traps while these are about. So for the Faraki, we decided that the best kill order was the Waste Walkers, then the Stone Gazers, then the Skirmishers in kind of a priority order, because the Waste Walkers are dealing the highest amount of damage. The Stone Gazers don't do that much, they do a stun, but I believe it is interruptible, and the Skirmishers hardly do anything. Now what you do need to remember is that the dinosaur people, the mob dinosaur that drops the orb from the Zandalari, Dinomancers, not dinosaur, all confused again, will also jump down 4 times throughout the fight, once for each gate. Once these do jump down, they will become your highest priority to kill, so it will then become Dinomancer, Waste Walker, Stone Gazer, Skirmisher. Once the first gate has been destroyed, you'll move on to the second one, which is the Gurubashi. And these only have two main mobs, but one of the mobs, thankfully, for some reason, summons death. Not literal death, but physical death. So the first mob is the Gurubashi Bloodlord, and these will keep on coming out of the gate until it has been destroyed, and they have an ability called Rending Charge, and this is where it will charge at an opponent and strike them, causing them to bleed for 40,000 physical damage every 1 second for 15 seconds. So as you can see, the damage is starting to mount up. And the second mob that comes from the Gurubashi gate is the Venom Priest, and a total of these three will, well, they jump down from the arena once the Gurubashi have been called to action. And these have an ability called Venom Bolt Volley, and this is where it will cast a bolt of venom at every raid member, which will inflict 10,000 nature damage instantly, and then 10,000 nature damage every 3 seconds for 1 minute. Again, this is also a stacking debuff, but it can be dispelled. Now, the Gurubashi Venom Priest can also summon a Venomous Effusion, and this also has the Venom Bolt Volley attack, so you do need to watch out for stacks getting quite high on that. I think it's manageable if it gets to 10 stacks, which I think it is maximum is, but you want to be trying to dispel it at about 4 or 5, just so you don't get too much damage being dealt. And the Venomous Effusion's second ability is called Living Poison, and this is where a living poison pool will spawn underneath the Venomous Effusion's place of spawn, and this will inflict 100,000 nature damage to enemies that are within 4 yards of it, and every 1 second it will actually move around slightly, so it is kind of constantly moving, but you do also need to be aware of not standing in this or having it move to where you're currently standing. And now moving on to the third gate, we have the Jakari, and again these have got their own set of mobs, 3 in total, which do have a specific kill order that we kind of put to them in order to make sure we're not getting too much damage dealt to us. Now the first mob is a Risen Jakari Warrior, and these will keep on coming from the gate until it has been destroyed by Horridon. Now their first ability is called Deadly Plague, and this will spread a deadly plague to players, inflicting 20,000 shadow damage every 3 seconds for 5 minutes. Now this is a disease effect, so it is able to be removed by certain classes, so you do need to be aware of that throughout the fight. Now the Jakari warriors cannot actually be tanked, they just focus on random players, so you do kind of need to be stacked up for this fight so that you can AoE down the mobs and also keep healing up high. Now the second mob is called a Risen Jakari Champion, and again these attack random targets, they cannot be controlled at all, and they also have the Deadly Plague ability. So for example, if you then have a Jakari Champion and a Jakari Warrior up, and they're both casting Deadly Plague, then the stacks again are going to get pretty high. So you do need to bear this in mind when it comes to healing, dispelling, and also which target you're DPSing down. And the final mob for this gate is a Jakari Frozen Warlord, and a total of 3 will jump down from the arena, and they have 2 abilities each. The first ability is Mortal Strike, and these mobs can be tanked as well, so bear that in mind. Mortal Strike, which is a powerful blow that will inflict 300% weapon damage, and it will also leave a debuff on the player, which will reduce the healing they receive by 50% for 8 seconds. So if you've got 3 of them on one tank, it can be quite deadly. The second ability they have is called a Frozen Orb. Now the Frozen Orb will spawn, and it will inflict 80,000 frost damage to anyone that is within 2 yards of it. So don't stand near it because it will hurt you quite a lot, and if you're also standing near it, it will shoot bolts of frost at nearby targets as well. So yeah, the orbs do move. It's kind of like a mage's frost orb. It's there, don't stand in front of it or next to it and you won't take the damage basically. Now obviously the kill order for this is the Frozen Warlords want to be killed off first, and then you want to just decide whether you want to kill the champions or the warriors. They both have the same abilities, so they're both going to be dealing as much damage as each other. And now moving on to the fourth and final door, and the one that I think deals the most damage to players, it's the Amani. And they have 4 mobs that spawn instead of 3 like the other doors do. And the first mob is an Amani She Protector. Now, the Protector will not deal that much damage, but you do want to kind of kill them off. They're just the mobs that are there hitting you with swords, just like being a pain in the arse. Don't massively prioritize them, but you do want to make sure you are getting them with dots and AoEing them down slightly. The second mob is a Amani She Flamecaster, and these cast an ability called Fireball, which it's pretty much like a mage's fireball, except it deals a little bit less damage. It will hurl a ball of fire at a random player, inflicting 100,000 fire damage. Now this ability is interruptible, so in order to reduce damage you do want to keep interrupting these if possible, maybe set up an interrupter rotation. The next mob that spawns from this gate is an Amani Warbear, and a total of 3 will jump down from the arena, and these have a frontal cone ability, which is even more fun for your tanks. And this ability is called Swipe, and it will deal 100,000 physical damage to all players in a 5-yard cone. Now if you've got 3 of these spawning, then your tank's got them all on him. He's going to take 300,000 damage if he does get hit by the cone swipe ability. So it's going to be a little bit awkward to try and keep him alive, but it is easily doable at the same time. And the final mob that spawns from this gate is an Amani She Beast Shaman. And these actually ride on the warbears that spawn, so you can only attack them once the warbear has been killed, which is a little bit of a pain in the arse really. And these have 3 abilities. The first one is Chain Lightning, and this will inflict 80,000 nature damage to a player, and it will then jump to other players if they're within 5 yards, and it will increase their damage taken by 50% per jump. So for example, if there's 3 players standing on top of each other, it jumps to player number 1 and deals 80,000 nature damage. It then jumps to player 2 and it'll be dealing 120,000 nature damage. And then I don't know if it's half of 120 or half of 80 on top of that again, but player 3 can also be taking, it's either going to be 160,000 nature damage or it's going to be 180,000 nature damage. So you do need to make sure you're kind of spread out with a yard range indicator of about 5. The Beast Shaman's second ability is called Hex of Confusion, and this is a curse effect, so it can be decursed from players, and the hex will be put on a random player for 30 seconds. Now this will give them a 50% chance to injure themselves for 50,000 physical damage whenever they cast a spell or use an ability. So if you're there spamming all your abilities away, it can be quite deadly really, and you're going to hurt yourself with it. And their final ability is called a Lightning Nova Totem, and this is a totem that is placed on the ground which will pulse lightning every 3 seconds and will inflict 200,000 nature damage to enemies within 8 yards. So this does need to be killed off pretty fast. But once you've killed off gate number 4, you then move on to Horridon and also the War God. So it's kind of an easy fight, but it also requires a lot of coordination and a lot of healing at the same time. So that's going to do it for this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide. And if you are interested in future raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel or check out www.flaskup.com for all your Mr. Pandaria raiding guide needs.